A persistent nuisance. Officer Miller adjusted the brim of his cap, trying to ignore the persistent tugging at his pant leg. It was a scruffy thing, all matted fur and two big paws, with eyes that held an unnerving depth for such a young creature. He'd seen it before, hanging around the edge of the precinct parking lot, a shadow that moved with a surprising tenacity. "Go on, pup," he mumbled, shooing it with a gentle kick of his boot. "Find your owner." The puppy, undeterred, let out a soft whine, its tail a hesitant thump against his shin. Then, as if sensing his resolve weakening, it bolted a few yards towards the dense line of oaks bordering the municipal park, looked back, and whined again. Miller sighed. He had paperwork, a stack of incident reports that mocked him from his desk. He definitely didn't have time for a stray. He took a step towards his patrol car, and the puppy emitted a surprisingly loud bark, darting further into the trees, its small body disappearing briefly before reappearing, peering back with an almost accusatory stare. It was a bizarre, almost human gesture. All right, you win," Miller muttered, more to himself than the dog. This was ridiculous. He checked his watch. 5 minutes tops. He followed the animal into the cool shade of the woods, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling the air. The puppy, a blur of motion, led him deeper, its pace quickening. Miller found himself jogging to keep up, a growing sense of unease starting to prickle at the back of his neck. This wasn't typical dog behavior. It wasn't just wandering, it was leading. The forest thickened, sunlight dappling through the canopy in fragmented patterns. The puppy suddenly stopped, its ears perked, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It nudged a patch of flattened ferns with its nose, then looked up at Miller, its eyes wide. Miller knelt, scanning the ground. The ferns looked disturbed, as if something heavy had been dragged across them. A few yards further, tangled in a blackberry bush, he saw it. A woman's embroidered purse, its contents spilled across the leaves. A compact, a lipstick, a driver's license. The photo on the license showed a smiling woman with bright red hair. A chill snaked down Miller's spine. "Stay here, pup," he commanded, pulling out his radio. "Miller to dispatch. I'm off trail in the municipal park, approximately a quarter-mile east of the main entrance. Found a discarded purse, signs of struggle. Requesting backup and immediate search of the area." Before he even finished the transmission, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. A choked sob, carried on the breeze. The puppy, however, had heard it clearly. It barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, and then plunged into a thicket of rhododendrons. Miller didn't hesitate. He pushed through the thorny branches, ignoring the scratches on his uniform. The cries grew louder now, tinged with pain and desperation. He emerged into a small clearing shaded by an ancient sycamore. There, huddled against its massive trunk, was the woman from the driver's license, her red hair matted with dirt, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. A dark bruise bloomed across her temple. The puppy was licking her face, a soft, comforting sound in the harrowing silence. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Miller asked, his voice gentle despite the rush of adrenaline. He approached cautiously, his hand on his sidearm, scanning the surrounding woods. The woman whimpered, her eyes fluttering open. He hit me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tried to take my car. I ran, fell." Miller quickly assessed her injuries, noting the blood seeping through her torn sleeve. He relayed the situation to dispatch, requesting an ambulance and a more extensive search for the assailant. He tore a strip of fabric from his uniform shirt, gently fashioning a makeshift sling for her arm. "We've got you, ma'am. Help is on the way." He glanced at the puppy, which had settled protectively beside the woman, its small body a warm presence against her. "This little guy, he saved you." The woman managed a weak smile, reaching out a trembling hand to stroke the puppy's head. "He wouldn't leave me. Barked and barked, until I thought my head would split. Then he ran off, and I thought I was truly alone." Within minutes, the sounds of sirens pierced the quiet forest. Uniformed officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, while paramedics carefully stabilized the injured woman. Miller watched as they lifted her onto a stretcher, the puppy whining softly until he scooped it up. It nestled into the crook of his arm, a tiny bundle of warmth and triumph. Later that evening, the hospital waiting room was filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low murmur of worried voices. The woman, whose name was Sarah, was stable, her arm broken, a concussion, but alive. Miller sat, the puppy asleep in his lap, its soft snores a comforting rhythm. Sarah's family, relieved and tearful, thanked him profusely. "He's a hero, officer," Sarah's mother said, her eyes red-rimmed but shining. "That little dog, he wouldn't leave her side." Miller nodded, stroking the puppy's head. "He truly is." A nurse appeared, her smile tired but kind. "Ms. Hayes is awake and asking for you, officer, and for her little protector." He followed her into Sarah's room. Sarah lay pale against the white pillows, but her eyes held a spark of life. The puppy, sensing her presence, wiggled excitedly in Miller's arms. He gently placed it on the bed, and it immediately snuggled against her uninjured side, licking her hand. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger now. "Both of you. I don't know what would have happened." She looked at the puppy, then up at Miller. "He needs a home. A real home. He saved my life." Miller felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling far removed from the usual satisfaction of a solved case. He looked down at the small, scruffy creature, then back at Sarah. "He already has one, ma'am, if you'll let me." Sarah's smile widened, a genuine, heartfelt expression of relief and gratitude. "He'd be lucky to have you, officer." Miller picked up the puppy, holding it close. Its small heart beat a steady rhythm against his hand. He hadn't gone looking for a dog, or a rescue, or even a hero. But sometimes, the most persistent nuisances turned out to be the greatest blessings. He scratched behind its ears, and the puppy let out a contented sigh, its eyes finally closing in peaceful sleep. He named him Scout. The persistent tug on Officer Miller's patrol pants was becoming less endearing and more irritating with each block. He glanced down at the scruffy terrier mix, a creature of boundless energy and matted fur, whose tail wagged with an optimism Miller couldn't fathom. "Look, fella, I told you, go home," he muttered, trying to quicken his pace past the municipal park's edge. The puppy, however, seemed to interpret his words as an invitation to a game of chase, yipping excitedly before darting a few yards towards the denser woods bordering the park, then looking back expectantly. Miller sighed. It had been following him for 20 minutes now, ever since he'd finished his coffee at the diner. Every attempt to shoo it away resulted in the same sequence: a frantic bark, a dash towards the trees, and an insistent glance over a bony shoulder. This time, as the puppy paused, a low, almost desperate whine escaped its throat, before it nudged a discarded floral purse with its nose, its attention fixed on the shadowed undergrowth. A jolt of unease prickled Miller's skin. That wasn't just litter. It was a distinctive accessory, one he remembered seeing on a missing persons bulletin this morning. The name Sarah Jenkins flashed in his mind. He pulled out his radio, his voice suddenly taut. "Dispatch, Miller. I'm at the east edge of Elmwood Park. I've got a situation developing." He approached the purse cautiously, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. The puppy, sensing the shift in his demeanour, stopped its playful antics, its small body stiffening, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached Miller's ears. A choked gasp, barely audible above the rustle of leaves. His gaze swept the dense foliage, the shadows deepening as the afternoon waned. "Stay here," he commanded the puppy, though the animal ignored him, plunging headfirst into the thicket, its frantic barks echoing back. Miller followed, pushing aside thorny branches that clawed at his uniform. The air grew heavy with the smell of damp earth and something metallic. He found them a few yards in. Sarah Jenkins lay crumpled beneath a gnarled oak, her face bruised, her clothing torn. The puppy was beside her, licking her face with frantic desperation, its tiny body trembling. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, wide with terror, then softened slightly as they landed on Miller. "Help! Him!" she rasped, pointing a weak finger not at herself, but at the puppy, before her eyes drifted shut again. Miller radioed for an ambulance and backup, his voice urgent. He gently checked Sarah for injuries, his training kicking in, a grim determination setting his jaw. The puppy, as if understanding the gravity of the situation, lay down protectively beside her, occasionally nudging her hand with its wet nose. Paramedics arrived swiftly, their lights flashing through the trees, their voices a sudden clamour in the quiet woods. As they carefully lifted Sarah onto a stretcher, the puppy let out a mournful cry, trying to follow. Miller scooped it up, holding the trembling animal close. Hours later, the hospital waiting room felt sterile and cold. Miller sat, the puppy nestled in his lap, surprisingly quiet. A nurse eventually emerged, her smile tired but genuine. "Sarah's going to be okay. She's stable, suffering from a concussion and some abrasions, but she's very lucky." She paused, her gaze falling on the small creature. "She asked for the dog, said he saved her life." Miller carried the puppy into Sarah's room. Sarah, pale but awake, extended a weak hand. The puppy wriggled free, leaping onto the bed and showering her face with licks. A genuine smile touched Sarah's lips, the first Miller had seen. "He stayed with me," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "He wouldn't leave, not even when... He ran for help, I think. He kept tugging at my sleeve." As Miller prepared to leave, a thought solidified in his mind. He looked at the puppy, then back at Sarah. "He doesn't have a home," Miller said, the words feeling right as they left his lips. "And well, I think he just found one." Sarah's smile widened, her eyes glistening. "He's a hero, officer. What will you call him?" Miller looked down at the furry creature, who was now nuzzling his hand, an undeniable bond already forming. "Scout," he declared, the name fitting perfectly. "He's a natural-born scout." Signs of trouble. Officer Miller adjusted the brim of his cap, trying to ignore the persistent tugging at his pant leg. The scruffy terrier mix, all matted fur and wide, pleading eyes, yipped again, a sound both desperate and insistent. He'd shooed it away twice already, once from the precinct parking lot, and again from his patrol car. Now, Here it was, at the edge of the bike path, its tail a frantic blur, nudging his hand with a wet nose, before turning its head towards the dense woods. "Look, fella, I don't have any kibble on me," Miller muttered, taking a step back. The dog didn't give up. It barked, a surprisingly deep sound for its size, then trotted a few paces into the tree line, glancing back expectantly. When Miller didn't follow, it returned, nudging his hand again, then grabbed the cuff of his trousers, pulling with surprising strength. A peculiar sense of unease settled over Miller. This wasn't typical stray behavior. The dog wasn't begging for food, it was trying to lead him somewhere. He hesitated, then sighed, a slow surrender. All right, you win. What is it? A squirrel convention?" He followed the dog as it darted through the underbrush, its small body weaving effortlessly between saplings and ferns. The air grew cooler, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. The path was narrow, barely a game trail, and Miller found himself ducking branches, his uniform snagging on thorny bushes. The terrier, however, moved with purpose, its nose low to the ground, occasionally letting out a soft whimper. A flash of colour ahead caught Miller's eye, a bright red scarf tangled in a low-hanging branch. He pulled it free, the silk cool against his fingers. It smelled faintly of lavender. A few more yards, and the dog stopped abruptly beside a thick clump of ferns, whining low in its throat. Miller pushed aside the fronds and saw it. A woman's purse, its contents spilled across the damp earth. A wallet lay open, displaying an ID with the name Sarah Jenkins, missing person, reported last night. His heart gave a jolt. The dog whined again, louder this time, then trotted a few feet further, its ears perked, its body tense. A faint sound reached Miller, a soft, almost inaudible moan. He dropped to a crouch, straining his ears. There it was again, weaker but unmistakably human. "Hold on, I'm coming," he called out, his voice cutting through the quiet woods. He moved faster now, pushing aside branches, the dog a frantic blur at his heels. The moans became clearer, tinged with pain. He found her huddled at the base of a fallen oak, partially concealed by a thicket of blackberry bushes. Sarah Jenkins. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, and her arm was bent at an unnatural angle. A deep gash marred her forehead, and her eyes fluttered open as Miller approached. The terrier immediately nestled against her side, licking her hand, a soft, comforting rumble emanating from its chest. "Officer?" she whispered, her voice reedy. "Yes, ma'am. You're Sarah Jenkins, right? We've been looking for you." He quickly assessed her injuries. "Don't try to move. Help is on the way." He pulled out his radio, his voice urgent as he relayed their coordinates, requesting an ambulance and backup. He saved me," Sarah rasped, her eyes fixed on the dog. "Came back after he ran off. Stayed with me all night. Kept me warm." Miller looked at the scruffy animal, now gazing up at him with an intelligent, almost proud expression. This wasn't just a stray. This was a guardian. Hours later, the emergency room glowed with sterile light. Sarah, her arm in a cast and a bandage on her head, looked much better, though still pale. Officer Miller sat beside her, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in his hand. The terrier, cleaned up and surprisingly fluffy after a quick bath at the shelter, lay curled at his feet, an adoption form already signed and tucked into his pocket. "You really saved her, little guy," Miller murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. The terrier thumped its tail against the linoleum. Sarah smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "He's amazing. What are you going to name him?" Miller looked down at the dog, a silent promise forming in his heart. Scout, he decided, the name feeling instinctively right. He's my new scout. As Sarah was wheeled out for observation, Miller followed, Scout trotting faithfully at his side. The hospital corridor, usually a place of hushed anxieties, seemed to shimmer with a quiet warmth. The desperate pull on his pants, the frantic barks, the unexpected journey into the woods, it had all led to this. A life saved, a new companion found, and a quiet understanding that sometimes the most profound connections arrive on four paws, demanding to be followed. The discarded purse. The persistent tugging at Officer Miller's uniform trousers was becoming more than a minor annoyance. It was a testament to the sheer, unyielding will of the scruffy terrier mix. He'd tried shoeing it, even a stern, "Go on, get out of here," accompanied by a dismissive wave, but the dog remained, a shadow with a mission. Each time Miller turned back towards his patrol car, the small creature would dart ahead, a flurry of mottled brown and white fur, then pause at the edge of the sprawling woods, casting anxious glances over its shoulder, as if silently urging him to follow. The early afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, felt oppressive, baking the asphalt and making the air shimmer above the road. Miller wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. He was due for lunch, and a scruffy stray was not on his schedule. Yet, there was something in the dog's frantic energy, its desperate whimpers, that gnawed at him. It wasn't just begging for food, it was pleading. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire shift, Miller finally relented. All right, you win," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. The terrier, as if understanding, let out a yip of triumph and bolted into the undergrowth, disappearing between gnarled oaks and tangles of wild brambles. Miller followed, the crunch of dry leaves under his boots, a stark contrast to the distant hum of traffic. The air immediately grew cooler, thicker with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. Sunlight dappled through the dense canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. The dog, a blur of motion ahead, would occasionally stop, looking back to ensure Miller was still behind him, then plunge onward with renewed vigour. Miller found himself scanning the ground, not for the dog, but for whatever had so thoroughly captivated its attention. Then he saw it, a flash of crimson amidst the muted greens and browns. It was a scarf, silk, vibrant and out of place, snagged on a low branch. A knot tightened in Miller's stomach. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was something else entirely. He knelt, carefully disentangling the fabric. It felt expensive, soft to the touch. A few yards further, half hidden beneath a fallen log, lay a woman's purse. Its leather was scuffed, the clasp broken, and its contents spilled out across the leaves. A wallet, a compact, a lipstick, and a single pearl earring. Miller recognized the purse immediately. Sarah Jenkins, missing for 2 days. The search had been extensive, focusing on the hiking trails further north. No one had thought to look this deep into the woods bordering the main road. His heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Sarah!" he called out, his voice a low, urgent whisper. The terrier, now sitting expectantly beside the scattered items, whined softly. He pushed deeper, his eyes darting, his ears straining. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, reached him. A low, pained groan, followed by a choked sob. He quickened his pace, pushing aside thick branches, his uniform snagging on thorns. And there she was. Curled at the base of a massive oak, obscured by a curtain of hanging vines, lay Sarah Jenkins. Her clothes were torn, her face pale and streaked with dirt, a nasty gash bleeding freely on her forehead. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Beside her, nestled close, was the terrier. Its body was a furry shield, its head resting gently on her arm. It hadn't left her. It had stayed, a silent guardian, for what must have been 2 nights and a day. Miller knelt beside her, his police training kicking in, pushing aside the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and distant. A weak, raspy whisper escaped her lips. "The dog. He stayed." The terrier looked up at Miller, its eyes wide and trusting, then licked Sarah's hand. Miller reached out, stroking its head. "You're a good boy," he murmured, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. He radioed for an ambulance, his voice clipped and efficient, then stayed with Sarah, offering what comfort he could, the little dog never leaving her side. Later, at the county hospital, Sarah, now stable and conscious, lay in a pristine white bed. Her parents, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion, sat beside her. When Miller entered, the terrier, whom Sarah had immediately christened Scout, trotted in beside him, its tail a blur. Sarah's eyes lit up. "He saved me, officer," she said, her voice stronger now, though still fragile. "He wouldn't let me give up. He barked all night to keep animals away. He licked my face when I passed out." Miller nodded, a lump in his throat. "He's a hero, Sarah." "Are you going to keep him?" Sarah asked, her gaze fixed on the dog, who was now resting his head on the edge of her bed. Miller looked down at Scout, who gazed up at him with an intelligent, soulful expression. The choice had been made the moment he'd seen the dog shielding Sarah. "I am," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "He's coming home with me." Scout let out a soft woof, as if in agreement, and wagged his tail, sealing the unexpected bond forged in the heart of the whispering woods. A faint cry. The persistent tug on Officer Miller's uniform trousers stretched his patience thin. For the past 20 minutes, a scruffy terrier mix, its intelligent amber eyes tracking his every move, had been his uninvited escort through Willow Creek's quiet outskirts. "Beat it, pal," Miller grumbled, a gentle boot offering a suggestion. The dog, however, merely sidestepped, emitted a desperate yip, then darted towards the dense oak line bordering whispering pines, glancing back expectantly. "Seriously?" Miller sighed, raking a hand through his close-cropped hair. A stack of paperwork awaited him at the precinct. An impromptu game of canine follow the leader was decidedly not on his schedule. He checked his watch. Failure to dislodge his furry shadow would undoubtedly result in its accompanying him all the way back to the station. With another exasperated sigh, he feigned disinterest and pivoted, heading in the opposite direction. The dog refused to yield. A flurry of urgent, sharp barks punctuated the morning's tranquility, intensifying with each step Miller took away from the woods. He risked another glance. The terrier seemed to dance with agitation, its stubby tail a frantic asymmetrical blur, eyes darting between the thicket and the retreating officer. A raw plea resonated in its desperate persistence, a silent narrative that pierced Miller's professional curiosity, overriding his initial annoyance. This was no mere hungry stray seeking a handout. All right, you win," he muttered, reluctantly turning back. "But if this is about a squirrel, you owe me a donut." A triumphant bark answered him. The dog spun and vanished into the undergrowth, melting between the trees. Miller hesitated, then followed, pushing through a curtain of low-hanging branches. The scent of damp earth and pine needles enveloped him, swiftly displacing the faint exhaust fumes from the road. The terrier, a brown blur now, kept looking back, ensuring its human companion was still trailing. They trekked for what felt like 10 minutes, plunging deeper into the forest, the path growing increasingly indistinct. Miller's uniform snagged on thorns. Twigs snapped under his heavy boots. Just as he considered retreating, the dog abruptly froze, nose to the ground, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It nudged something with its snout. Miller knelt. It was a brightly coloured silk scarf, patterned with delicate floral designs, an incongruous splash of civilization in the wild. Next to it, half hidden by a fallen log, lay a woman's purse, its strap broken, contents scattered across the leaf litter. A driver's license, face up, identified Sarah Jenkins. Missing for 2 days. The alert had circulated yesterday afternoon. A sudden chill traced Miller's spine. This was no prank, no squirrel. He scanned the dense foliage, hand instinctively dropping to his sidearm. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice echoing unsettlingly through the quiet woods. Only the distant chirping of birds replied. The terrier whined, then resumed its frantic pulling, this time at his pant leg with heightened urgency, its wide eyes conveying a desperate plea. It wasn't leading him to the scarf and purse, but past them, deeper still. "Okay, boy, lead the way," Miller whispered, his voice tight. He unsnapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Miller. I'm off trail, approximately half a mile east of Whispering Pines. I've located personal effects belonging to Sarah Jenkins. Sending you my coordinates. Proceeding deeper into the woods with a potential canine assist. Stand by." He followed the dog, senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. The trees grew thicker, casting long, shifting shadows that limited visibility to a few feet ahead. Just as doubt began to creep in, a sound reached him. Faint, almost imperceptible, carried on the breeze. A whimper. The dog let out a triumphant bark, then darted forward. Miller broke into a jog, pushing through a thicket of thorny bushes, ignoring the scratches on his arms. And then he saw her. She was huddled at the base of a massive oak, almost completely hidden by a camouflage of moss and tangled roots. Her clothes were torn, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but her eyes, though glazed with pain, held a flicker of desperate hope. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, her arm cradled awkwardly. The terrier was already there, licking her face with fervent devotion. "Sarah?" Miller's voice was hoarse with relief. He knelt beside her, his training kicking in. "I'm Officer Miller. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." Sarah Jenkins tried to speak, but only a weak croak emerged. She pointed a trembling finger at the dog. He stayed. 2 days. My leg." Miller gently examined her. Definitely a broken leg, likely an arm too, and severe dehydration. He radioed for immediate medical assistance and a rescue team, providing precise coordinates. As he worked to stabilize her, covering her with his uniform jacket, he looked at the terrier. Exhausted but vigilant, the dog lay curled protectively against Sarah's side, its amber eyes fixed on Miller. "You're a good boy," Miller murmured, reaching out a hand. The dog licked it, then nudged Sarah's face again. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his heart, that this brave, selfless creature had saved Sarah's life. He also knew he couldn't leave him behind. He had found his unexpected partner. The discovery. The persistent tugging at his trouser leg was more an irritant than a plea. Officer Miller, mid-stride on his patrol route, glanced down. A scruffy terrier mix, a tangle of matted fur and boundless energy, stared up at him with eyes that held an unsettling intensity. "Go on, scram," Miller muttered, nudging it gently with his boot. The dog, however, seemed to view this as an invitation to a game. It yipped, dashed a few paces towards the dense line of oaks bordering the park, then looked back, head cocked, as if expecting Miller to follow. Miller sighed, adjusting his hat. He had a precinct report due, not time for a canine escort. He continued walking, but the dog was relentless. It reappeared, weaving between his legs, its small body a furry magnet, pulling him towards the woods. This wasn't the usual playful approach of a stray. There was an urgency in its movements, a desperate plea in its frantic barks. Miller finally stopped, a flicker of unease stirring within him. He'd seen enough in his career to know when something felt off, even if it was just a dog's behaviour. "All right, what is it, boy?" he grumbled, more to himself than the animal. The dog responded by spinning in a tight circle, yelping once more, then darting into the dappled shadows beneath the trees. Hesitantly, Miller followed, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the city fading, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of unseen birds. The dog, now ahead, kept glancing back, ensuring he was still in pursuit, its tail a frantic blur. Minutes later, deep within the whispering woods, the dog skidded to a halt beside a disturbed patch of ground. A branch was snapped, leaves scuffed, and then, unmistakable, a woman's leather purse lay half buried under a pile of dead foliage. Its contents, a lipstick, a crumpled receipt, a loose key, were scattered nearby. Miller's breath hitched. This wasn't a casual stroll. This was an abandonment, a struggle. He knelt, examining the scene, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "Someone's been here," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. The dog let out a low whine, nudging the purse with its nose, then turned and plunged deeper into the undergrowth. Miller didn't hesitate this time. He drew his service weapon, his senses hyper-alert. The woods felt different now, charged with a silent tension. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice seemed swallowed by the trees. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, a low moan reached his ears. It was human. He quickened his pace, crashing through saplings, following the unwavering canine guide. The moans grew stronger, laced with pain. And there she was. Sarah Jenkins, the woman reported missing 2 days prior, lay curled at the base of a thick oak, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her eyes, however, were fixed on the terrier, which now sat protectively beside her, its small body pressed against her side. It had kept her company, guarded her, refused to leave. Miller holstered his weapon, his initial annoyance replaced by a wave of profound relief and an unexpected surge of admiration for the little creature. Sarah, it's Officer Miller. You're safe now. He radioed for an ambulance, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He knelt beside her, checking for other injuries, while the dog, now satisfied, licked her hand gently. Hours later, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled Sarah's hospital room. Miller watched from the doorway as Sarah, pale but lucid, recounted her ordeal to a detective. She'd slipped, fallen, and couldn't move. The dog, she explained, had appeared shortly after her fall, staying by her side, barking sporadically, as if trying to summon help. Miller knew it had done more than just bark. It had led him directly to her. As Sarah finished, her gaze drifted to Miller. "And the dog?" she whispered, her voice still weak. Miller smiled, a genuine, easy smile that rarely found its way to his face. "He's waiting outside. I think he's adopted me." He paused, then added, "I'm calling him Scout." Later that evening, after Sarah had been stabilized and Scout had been given a clean bill of health by a vet, Miller found himself on his worn sofa, the terrier curled contentedly on his lap. The apartment felt different, less empty. Scout stirred, nudged Miller's hand with his wet nose, and then let out a soft sigh, settling deeper into the warmth. Miller scratched behind Scout's ears, feeling a connection he hadn't known he was missing. The persistent tugging that had annoyed him just that morning had led him to a discovery far greater than a missing person. It had led him to a loyal companion, an unexpected blessing, and a profound shift in the quiet rhythm of his solitary life. A Guardian's account. The crisp morning air usually offered Miller a moment of peace, a quiet prelude to the day's unpredictable demands. Today, however, his solitude was aggressively interrupted. A small, wiry terrier, a tangle of scruffy brown fur and boundless energy, had attached itself to him the moment he stepped out of the precinct. It yapped, a high-pitched, insistent sound, and nipped playfully at his bootlaces. Miller tried shooing it away with a wave of his hand, a tired, "Go on, beat it." But the dog merely wagged its tail harder, a hopeful glint in its dark eyes. It was still there when he pulled up to the park for his routine patrol, a persistent shadow trotting behind his cruiser, a miniature engine of determination. "Seriously, pal, I don't have time for this," Miller muttered, stepping out of the car. The terrier, undeterred, began a new tactic. It would dash a few yards towards the dense tree line bordering the park, then turn, barking furiously as if beckoning him. Then it would return, nudging his hand with its wet nose before repeating the whole frantic process. There was an unusual urgency in its actions, a desperate quality that went beyond typical stray behavior. Miller watched, intrigued despite himself, as the dog darted off again, its barks now sharper, more distressed. He sighed, a reluctant curiosity nudging him forward. All right, I'm coming. What's got you so riled up?" He followed, his heavy boots crunching on fallen leaves, the scent of damp earth and pine needles growing stronger with each step. The dog, as if sensing his capitulation, led the way with renewed vigour, its tail a blur of brown. Deep inside the woods, where the sunlight dappled through the canopy in fragmented patterns, the air grew cooler, hushed. Then Miller saw it. A disturbance in the undergrowth. A patch of ferns was flattened, and a small, vibrant red clutch purse lay half buried in the leaves, its contents spilled across the forest floor. A compact, a crumpled tissue. A house key glinting dully. A cold knot tightened in Miller's stomach. This wasn't just litter. It was a sign, an undeniable indicator of trouble. He bent down, examining the purse, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for other clues. The dog, meanwhile, had moved ahead, its barks now softer, more continuous, tinged with a whimper. It was a sound that tugged at something deep within Miller, a primal plea. He pushed further into the thicker part of the woods, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon. The air grew heavy with an unspoken tension. Then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible moan carried on the breeze. It was human. He quickened his pace, crashing through a thicket of blackberry bushes, thorns snagging at his uniform. The dog was waiting, standing guard over a figure slumped at the base of a gnarled oak tree. A woman. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, and a nasty gash bled sluggishly above her temple. Her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. The terrier, now quiet, pressed itself against her side, occasionally licking her hand. "Sarah Jenkins?" Miller whispered, recognizing her from the missing persons report that had just come in. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open, revealing glazed, unfocused eyes. "Help," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "It's okay, Sarah. You're safe now," Miller said, pulling out his radio. "I found her. Sarah Jenkins. She's injured but alive. I'll need an ambulance and a rescue team, deep in the woods, off the old hiking trail, near the big oak." He knelt beside her, checking her pulse, offering what comfort he could. The little dog, now resting its head on Sarah's arm, looked up at Miller with an expression of profound relief. Hours later, after Sarah had been stabilized and transported to the hospital, Miller found himself in the waiting room, still processing the morning's events. The terrier, which he had now affectionately dubbed Scout for its remarkable tracking abilities, sat patiently by his feet, its earlier frantic energy replaced by a calm, watchful presence. A nurse emerged, her smile tired but warm. "She's going to be all right, officer. A broken leg, a concussion, but she's stable. She keeps asking about the dog." Miller nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He understood. Sarah's gratitude, undoubtedly immense, mirrored his own. He looked down at Scout, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. This little creature, once an annoyance, had become a hero, leading him to a life in peril, protecting it until help arrived. Later that evening, after the paperwork was done and the initial reports filed, Miller made his way back to the hospital. Sarah, pale but conscious, smiled weakly when she saw him. "Thank you, officer. And thank you, Scout," she whispered, reaching out to pet the dog. "He never left my side. Not once." Miller cleared his throat. "He's quite a dog, Sarah. He's going to need a home." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "I wish I could, but I'll be laid up for a while." Miller looked at Scout, then back at Sarah, a decision solidifying in his mind. "He's found one," he said, a warmth spreading through his chest. "With me." Scout, as if understanding, nudged his hand, and Miller felt an unexpected surge of companionship. The quiet, solitary life he'd known for so long had just been irrevocably, wonderfully altered. The missing person found. The usual quietude of the crisp morning air, a solace Miller typically found in his early rounds, shattered today. A diminutive yet persistent force relentlessly chipped away at his peace. The terrier, a dishevelled bundle of kinetic energy, nudged his calf again, a low, throaty whine reverberating through its small frame. Miller sighed, attempting to disregard the creature as he scanned the precinct's boundary. He'd seen it before. A fringe dweller of the town's periphery, its gaze perpetually fixed on him, but never with such insistent fervour. "Go on, scram," he grumbled, the words sharper than intended. The dog merely emitted a sharp bark, surprisingly loud for its size, then trotted a few paces towards the dense woodland bordering the old park, an expectant backward glance. Its tail, a mere streak of motion, seemed to beckon. Miller shook his head, a flicker of unease quelled. Even strays typically shied from uniforms. This one was an anomaly. It circled back, nudging his hand this time, its cold, wet nose against his gloved fingers. Its amber eyes held an undeniable intensity, a silent, urgent plea. "What is it with you?" Miller muttered. But the dog's unwavering stare, its sheer refusal to yield, finally piqued his professional curiosity. He checked his watch. His sector was calm. A few minutes wouldn't hurt. All right, lead the way." The terrier's response was immediate. A joyous yelp, sharp and excited, then it streaked into the undergrowth, a fleeting shadow among the saplings. Miller followed, the crunch of fallen leaves under his boots a stark counterpoint to the small dog's rustling. The path dwindled, the trees thickened, and the air cooled, mottled sunlight struggling to pierce the canopy. A strange tension began to coil in his chest. The dog's playfulness had vanished. Its pace was swift, its focus absolute. Then, a splash of vibrant red against the muted browns and greens of the forest floor caught his eye. He bent to retrieve it. A woman's small leather purse, its clasp broken, contents scattered. A wallet, a compact, a tube of lipstick. A jolt went through him. This wasn't just a stray leading him astray. This was something far more serious. He knelt, examining the scene. No immediate signs of struggle, but the disarray suggested haste, perhaps panic. The terrier had stopped a few yards ahead, head cocked, ears pricked, a continuous, low whine now escaping its throat. Its gaze was fixed deeper into the woods, towards a thicket of gnarled oaks, not on him. Miller drew his service weapon, adrenaline surging. "Hello?" he called out, his voice piercing the stillness. "Police! Is anyone there?" A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached him then. A choked sob, followed by a weak moan. Unmistakable. Human. Injured. He pushed through the thorny bushes, the terrier darting ahead, its barks now sharper, more insistent. As he broke through the last line of foliage, the scene before him coalesced into a chilling tableau. There, partially concealed by the roots of a giant oak, lay a woman, her hair tangled with leaves and twigs, her face pale and streaked with dirt. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her jacket was torn, revealing a nasty gash on her arm. The terrier was nuzzling her hand, licking her face with frantic devotion. It was Sarah Jenkins, reported missing just yesterday. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, held a spark of relief when they met Miller's. "Officer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The dog. He stayed with me." Miller quickly assessed the situation. She was hypothermic, in shock, and clearly in immense pain. He immediately called for backup and paramedics, relaying his precise location. As he knelt beside her, checking for other injuries, the small terrier pressed itself against Sarah's side, a silent, furry guardian. It had saved her. It had refused to abandon her, running for help when she couldn't. The magnitude of its bravery, its unwavering loyalty, struck Miller with a force that momentarily stole his breath. This wasn't just a dog. This was a hero. Hours later, the sterile scent of the hospital filled the air. Sarah, now stabilized and conscious, lay in a clean bed, her leg in a cast, an IV drip infusing her arm. Miller stood by her bedside. The terrier, now cleaned and sporting a makeshift bandana, patiently settled at his feet. "He never left my side," Sarah recounted, her voice stronger now, though still tinged with awe. "I fell, twisted my ankle, couldn't move. I was so scared. He just appeared, and he stayed. He barked, and then he just took off, and I thought he'd abandoned me. But he went to get help." She reached down, stroking the terrier's head, a soft smile gracing her lips. "He's a good boy, officer. A real hero." Miller looked down at the dog, a profound shift occurring within him. The nuisance, the persistent stray, was now Scout. He knew it. This creature, with its unwavering spirit and courageous heart, had not only saved a life, but had also, in some inexplicable way, chipped away at the walls he'd built around his own. "He is," Miller agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. "Sarah, once you're back on your feet, if you don't mind, I was thinking of giving him a home." Sarah's eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. "Oh, Officer Miller, that's wonderful. He deserves it. He deserves the best." Miller knelt, extending a hand. Scout, sensing the shift in Miller's demeanour, nudged his palm, then licked it with a gentle warmth. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the hospital, Miller knew his solitary life was about to change. He had found not just a hero, but a companion. Gratitude and reunion. The crisp morning air usually offered Miller a quiet solace, a predictable rhythm to his patrols. Not today. A small, wiry terrier, a tangle of matted fur and boundless energy, had attached itself to him like a burr to wool. It yipped, a sharp, insistent sound, then tugged at his pant leg with surprising strength before darting a few steps towards the dense tree line bordering the park, looking back expectantly. Miller sighed, trying to shoo it away, but the dog was relentless. Its barks grew more frantic, its pulls more determined, each frantic tug a silent plea. All right, I get it," Miller muttered, more to himself than the dog. Its persistence was unsettling, a raw edge of desperation that pricked at his professional instincts. He followed, a growing unease settling in his gut. The dog, as if sensing his capitulation, led the way with a renewed burst of energy, its short legs a blur. It plunged into the undergrowth, a path less trodden, and Miller found himself navigating thorny bushes and slick leaves. The air grew cooler, damp with the scent of decaying leaves and earth. Then he saw it, a flash of worn leather amidst the ferns. A purse overturned, its contents spilled across the forest floor. A lipstick, a crumpled tissue, a driver's license peeking out from a wallet. Sarah Jenkins. The name resonated with a recent missing person report. A shiver, colder than the morning air, traced its way down Miller's spine. The dog, now silent, nudged the purse with its nose, then whined, a low, guttural sound, before darting deeper into the woods, glancing back at Miller. "Sarah?" Miller called out, his voice cutting through the hushed woods. A faint moan, barely audible, answered him. He broke into a run, following the dog's frantic lead. The terrier, now a furry beacon of urgency, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, its small body pushing through thickets, its nose to the ground. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of adrenaline and fear. He pictured the missing person report. A woman in her late 20s, last seen near the park. He found her huddled at the base of a large oak, partially concealed by a fallen log. Her face was pale, smudged with dirt, and her lips were tinged blue. Her ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a dark bruise bloomed on her temple. She shivered uncontrollably, her eyes fluttering open at the sound of his approach, wide with fear and relief. The dog, its mission accomplished, lay beside her, nudging her cold hand with its nose. "Officer Miller," he announced, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands as he knelt beside her, checking for injuries. "I'm here to help. An ambulance is on its way." Sarah could only whimper, her body racked with tremors. He draped his jacket over her, trying to impart some warmth, his gaze softening as he looked at the dog. "You stayed with her, didn't you, boy?" The dog, as if understanding, licked Sarah's cheek, then looked up at Miller, its tail giving a weak wag. The paramedics arrived, their voices a sudden clamour in the quiet woods. They carefully stabilized Sarah, securing her to a stretcher. Miller watched, a knot of emotion tightening in his chest. As they prepared to move her, Sarah reached out a weak hand, her eyes finding the terrier. "The dog. He saved me," she whispered, her voice raspy. "He wouldn't leave." At the hospital, the scent of antiseptic and fear hung heavy in the air. Miller waited, a cup of lukewarm coffee forgotten in his hand. The doctor emerged, his expression grave but relieved. Sarah was hypothermic, with a severe concussion and a fractured ankle, but she would recover. "If it weren't for that dog," the doctor stated, "she wouldn't have made it through the night." Later that evening, Miller found himself standing at Sarah's bedside. She looked better, though still pale, her eyes now clear and grateful. The terrier, whom Miller had unofficially named Scout, sat patiently by her bed, its tail thumping a soft rhythm against the floor. "He's amazing," Sarah whispered, stroking Scout's head. "He stayed with me all night, kept me warm, and then he just knew to go get help." Miller nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He had always been a solitary man, finding comfort in the predictable routines of his life. But seeing the connection between Sarah and this small, brave creature, something shifted within him. "He's a hero," Miller agreed, his gaze lingering on Scout. "A real hero." He cleared his throat, a decision solidifying in his mind. "Sarah, since he doesn't have a home, I was thinking I'd like to take him in." Sarah's eyes widened, a smile finally gracing her lips. Really? She asked, her voice laced with hope. That would be wonderful. He deserves a good home, Officer Miller. Miller knelt, extending a hand to Scout. The dog, without hesitation, nudged its head into his palm, its tail wagging with a joyous enthusiasm. Come on, Scout, Miller murmured, feeling a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't known he was missing. Let's go home. As he walked out of the hospital with the small dog trotting faithfully beside him, Miller knew his solitary life had just taken an unexpected, heartwarming turn. Scout wasn't just a stray anymore. He was a companion, a furry reminder of courage, loyalty, and the unexpected ways life could change. Hero's new home. The persistent tugging at Miller's pant leg was no longer an irritation. It was a constant, insistent rhythm against the backdrop of his quiet apartment. Scout, the terrier mix, had been officially his for 3 days now, a whirlwind of vet visits, paperwork, and an unexpected emotional shift. The first night, the dog had curled tightly against the base of his recliner, a small, warm weight that had rendered Miller strangely immobile for hours. Now, Scout was exploring. His nose, a twitching compass, led him from one scent to another, cataloguing every shadow, every dust bunny, every forgotten corner. Miller watched from the doorway of the small kitchen, a half-eaten sandwich in hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. He'd never considered himself a dog person, let alone one who found such quiet joy in observing a creature's delighted investigation of his mundane living space. The apartment, once a sanctuary of predictable solitude, now felt lighter. The first challenge had been Scout's boundless energy. The little dog seemed to possess an internal combustion engine, always ready for a new adventure. Miller found himself on daily walks that stretched longer than his usual solitary loops, Scout's short legs a blur as he bounced ahead, leash taut. They visited the park, where Scout, initially wary, soon found the courage to sniff other dogs, a tentative wag of his tail signalling a desire for connection. Miller, who typically avoided small talk, found himself exchanging pleasantries with other dog owners, a common bond forged in wagging tails and slobbery tennis balls. One afternoon, while Miller was attempting to read a report, Scout nudged a worn tennis ball into his lap. When Miller ignored it, the dog nudged it again, then let out a soft whine. Miller sighed, reaching for the ball. He tossed it a short distance, expecting Scout to retrieve it and bring it back. But the dog merely watched it roll before turning his head, eyes fixed on Miller. He then let out a sharp, decisive bark. Miller frowned. "What's wrong, boy? Go get it." Scout barked again, then trotted to the ball, nudged it with his nose, and looked back at Miller, a clear invitation in his intelligent gaze. Miller understood. Scout didn't want to fetch. He wanted Miller to play, to chase, to engage. A low chuckle rumbled in Miller's chest. He dropped the report, got to his knees, and crawled after the ball, making exaggerated woofing noises. Scout's tail thumped a rapid tattoo against the floor, a joyful sound that filled the silent apartment. The second challenge, and arguably the more profound one, was the quiet companionship. Miller had always valued his space, his privacy. Now there was a constant presence. Scout would follow him from room to room, a furry shadow. When Miller sat, Scout would settle at his feet, often resting his head on Miller's shoe, a soft sigh escaping him. At first, Miller felt a faint flicker of annoyance, a subtle invasion of his personal bubble. But as the days turned into a week, he began to realize it wasn't an invasion, it was an anchor, a reassurance. The most poignant moment came one evening when Miller was preparing dinner. He'd dropped a piece of cheese on the floor. Before he could bend to retrieve it, Scout, who had been lying patiently by the kitchen entrance, nudged it with his nose, then looked up at Miller, a silent question in his eyes. Miller, remembering the vet's strict dietary instructions, gently shook his head. Scout, without a whimper, simply backed away, settling down again. There was no snatching, no begging, just an understanding. It was then that Miller truly felt the weight of his responsibility, and with it, a profound sense of affection. This wasn't just a dog. This was a trusting, intelligent being who had saved a life, and now relied on him. Later that night, as Miller settled into bed, Scout padded in, jumping onto the rug beside the bed. Miller, after a moment's hesitation, reached down and scratched behind Scout's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. Miller realized the quiet was no longer empty. It was filled with the soft sounds of a dog breathing, a gentle thumping tail, and an unexpected sense of peace. The apartment wasn't just his home anymore. It was their home. And for the first time in a long time, Miller didn't feel quite so alone. The lingering chill of his past solitude had finally begun to thaw, replaced by the quiet, comforting warmth of a hero's new home.